Hello and welcome back to this Orbiter 2016 video series. I'm Tex and this is episode 9 of Journey to Saturn. In the previous episode we left Titan behind and we made our way over here to Saturn's second largest moon called Rhea. We did not quite get all the way there. We need to go ahead and complete the orbital insertion burn and also land on the surface of Rhea in this episode. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do here is just do a small plane alignment, and I should note that what I did is I added some UCGO cargos down on the surface of Rhea so that we can establish a base camp and just sort of add a, another touch of realism and fun to the mission. They were not previously there in any of my earlier scenarios, so when you download this scenario pack for this episode, they will be on the surface. Pretty much due to just limitations with these add-ons, because Dan has not updated those. Dan, if you're watching, please update this. I'm just giving you a hard time. I know you're busy, but like I said, they're not really compatible UCGO with Orbiter 2016. Neither is UMMU. So it took. I guess it took several tries. Orbiter crashed on me several times when I was trying to set up base camp and all that good stuff. So when you land on the surface of Rhea, you're going to have to use the scenario editor, unfortunately, to set up base camp and move things around. And but I do have a scenario with all of that already completed in my scenario pack that you'll be able to load, and base camp will be set up, and it looks pretty cool. So with that said, because those were not already in the scenario, I didn't really plan for that when we were coming to Rhea. And now that we're basically here at Rhea, you can see it right in front of us, although its G contribution is still relatively low. It would have been more ideal to plan this more ahead of time, but I guess we're still far enough away from it that I can make some small adjustments to the inclination. So base camp is right now the cargo, I guess we're saying, was sent in advance of us on an unmanned rocket or something. It's down on the surface with a latitude of 65 degrees south, I believe it is, and longitude of 53 degrees west. So negative 65 degrees and negative 53 degrees. So that comes out to an equatorial inclination of 72.03, but one thing that you also have to consider is the longitude of the ascending node. And so when I was experimenting with this, I was not able to get both of those exactly where they need to be, unfortunately. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or I'm just too close to Rhea at this point, because one other important factor is that we need to ensure our Periapsis altitude is relatively low. Now, I initially shot for a Periapsis altitude around 100 kilometers when we were flying to Rhea, but on our final approach here for the orbital insertion burn and when we circularize the orbit, I'm going to have my Periapsis down around 10 kilometers, nice and low. That's above any terrain, and that gives us, a nice low pass over the surface for our lander to just hop right down and conduct a landing. So what I'm doing right now is just playing around with the linear RCS, and honestly it took more time than it should have, quite frankly, but looking at the interplanetary MFD on the right side, is going to be more accurate than the orbit MFD. I'm trying to get my Periapsis altitude, PEA, where the mouse cursor is currently pointed, around 10 kilometers. But at the same time, I want to get the relative inclination up on the top around 72.03 degrees. So we're getting pretty close right here. We'll just use the control key and use some microburst, try and get those two exactly where I want them. So that's not bad, but let's keep playing with it and just try and get it right on that number. Okay, that's probably going to be good enough. Let's go ahead and time accelerate. You can see it's pretty much on 72.03 and Periapsis slightly under 10K. So very rapidly time accelerating here. As we approach Rhea, we're seeing the G contribution increase. And you can see how close we are to Rhea, yet the G contribution is still under 0.50. Saturn is just a dominant gravity force here. But what we're going to do is go ahead and basically just turn retrograde. We are currently, the orbit HUD currently has us set up with Saturn. So when I hit the retrograde autopilot, unfortunately the Deep Star is going to orient itself retrograde with relation to Saturn. But once we fall a little more over, I guess, 0.50 on the G contribution for Rhea, it will switch so that the retrograde autopilot will hold it retrograde with relation to Rhea. But that really doesn't matter because we're going to use the circularize program on IMFD on the right side there. And we're just going to coast down. We're looking at the burn time. It's currently showing to be about 252 seconds of burn time, about 1,700 and change on meters per second. And it has just changed, so now it's with relation to Rhea. So we're getting the true numbers of what we really care about. So with a burn time of about just under 220 seconds, it's falling as we coast down closer to Periapsis. We can estimate that PET on the left side on orbit MFD, when that's about half of what the burn time is required. That's when we're going to conduct the burn. So burn time's coming down a little bit. So probably when PET reaches around 105 seconds, somewhere in there, would be a good time to go ahead and hit auto burn. So let's just coast down here. We'll pan over so we get a nice view here of both Saturn and Rhea. And we're going to be passing pretty close to Rhea. Looks like our periapsis is at 9.7 kilometers. So we'll continue accelerating, time accelerating. And we're going to monitor PET. We don't want to pass that up. So we're getting within about 100 seconds now until it's time to conduct the burn. Okay, so there's 1:0. I've slowed time down all the way, and that's time to burn. So I've hit auto burn, and IMFD is conducting the burn for us. Very cool. You can see how close we are actually passing to the surface. Unfortunately, Rhea doesn't actually have terrain. No tree file that has the terrain data has been created for Rhea. But it's still still looks good on the surface. The microtextures by Jarmonic work just fine, so it will look pretty decent down on the surface anyways. Just kind of look around. You can actually see the microtextures just in front of us there because we're so low above the surface here that they're actually working. They're loading and it looks pretty good. It's going to look even better when we get closer down. So you can see we're just about captured here by Rhea. The orbit MFD is changing and there we go. We've been captured. We are at 10 times acceleration, now normal time. And it's going to continue burning until we're perfectly circularized. Just about there, and engine cutoff. So that looks great. Okay, so now that we're safely in orbit around Rhea, I've done a quick save, so you guys can pick up here if you'd like. We can look at the map MFD and let's target, it's called Lab, and you can see that it is in fact 53 degrees west and 65 degrees south. So what we're going to do is go to BaseSync, and we're going to manually input the latitude and longitude, so -65, -53, and let's change the number of orbits to 1. Okay, so we do have a bit of a plane change to do, and again, that has to do with the fact that I was not able to get the longitude of the ascending node and the inclination exactly where they should be, along with keeping periapsis nice and low. Had I planned this out ahead of time, it probably would have been much more, well, it definitely would have been more fuel efficient, but it is what it is. Let's take a look at our burn time here. We have not done anything with our spreadsheet in the previous episode. So I've added a couple lines in here. For now, we're doing a Titan to Rhea MOI. So basically, what we have remaining in our fuel from leaving Titan and arriving at Rhea. So the spreadsheet just kind of froze on me there. There we go. So let's input what we have left. That was 61,520 meters per second. So that means we use 3,964 meters per second to get from Titan to Rhea and circularize the orbit. So that's kind of a lot, I think, actually. I believe looking at the moon-to-moon calculator that Dimitri provided me, it should have been less than that, but I'm sure that's down to just purely pilot error on my part. The other thing that I wanted to mention with the Deep Star that I've noticed is it uses an incredible amount of fuel just orienting the vessel here. So for example, if I just hit the prograde autopilot button, it's convenient because it just, you know, points at prograde for me and I don't have to take the time to sit there and do it myself, but it uses so much fuel, more fuel than I really, I guess, anticipated. So that is definitely one thing that I should have taken into account when I did the flight planning, but fortunately we've brought more than enough fuel with us that it should not be a real problem. But just keep that in mind if you happen to be flying with Deep Star and you're trying to, you know, keep things super tight on fuel. You really need to account for that extra fuel expenditure you're going to use just orienting Deep Star. And I suppose it makes sense. It is a big, heavy vessel. So, all right. So we're coasting over to the node here on BaseSync MFD. Looks like about 6.9 seconds of burn time. And so we're just going to get over there and bring that off-plane distance in the center there. It's currently at 83 kilometers. We want to bring that down to close to 0 anyways. All right. So we'll burn when we're about 3 seconds away from the node. That is half of our burn time, 3.5 seconds or so. And that's approaching, and we're burning. So I'll manually orient the vessel here because of the engine thrust is so great. And there we go. So we're off by 315 meters, no big deal. The eccentricity of the orbit changed just a little bit, so we'll bring that back down close to 0, and that's fine. Okay, so we are now in line with the landing site, and we can just go ahead and orient the vessel prograde, just so we can kind of see where we're going. And we're going to coast, we're just over 1,000 kilometers away from the landing site, so there is absolutely no rush at this point. Rhea is pretty small, actually, so it's not going to take a whole lot of time to, or fuel for that matter, to deorbit and land. Now we are going to use the base land MFD, that's by Topper, and it is available in the links down in the description below the video here. I'm not sure, I don't think it's in full release phase. You can download it from Orbiter Forum, and so I'm not 100% positive, but I think it's still being, developed. So I had a little bit of trouble with documentation because there's no real clear documentation. He has like some pictures, and it's not completely done. So I suspect that once the final product is out, that there will be at least more comprehensive documentation. But I was able to pretty much figure it out. And the other thing is I don't know how much testing he's really done with this on other moons. I know he's done extensive testing with it on our moon. So, but I was able to get it to work a couple of times. I don't know if I did. I'm sure it was user error on my part, but a couple of times when I was testing with it, it actually didn't stop me in time. I ended up hitting the surface too hard, but it always does a great job of landing you exactly where you want to land, longitude, latitude wise. So we're now in the lander, and we've just undocked from Deep Star. So we're going to just translate back away from, or maybe down I should say, away from Deep Star a bit here. And actually translating down seems to be bringing the off-plane distance down a little bit, so that works out fine. That should suffice. So we're about just under 500 kilometers from the landing site. So it's probably a good time to go ahead and undock. Again, it's not a huge rush. The actual deorbit burn is not going to be really started until we're, I think, maybe about 20 kilometers from the landing site. Incredibly close, like I said. So we're going to go to manual mode on baseland and input the latitude and longitude. And that is done, and we'll hit OK. And we're just going to leave it alone for right now. But once we get a little closer, we're going to actually activate the autopilot, and baseland will actually go ahead and conduct the entire deorbit burn and landing for you. So yeah, so like I said, at this point, it's not a huge rush. We're safely in our lander here. We're waving goodbye to the crew, and just sort of slowly drifting away from Deep Star. Deep Star will remain here in a very low Rhea orbit while the crew goes down, and well, some of the crew. There is some left behind on Deep Star, obviously for safety purposes, but the crew's going to go down and land on the surface, conduct some science experiments, and just check out what this moon is all about. Alright, so we're pressing the yaw, pitch, roll, and engine buttons on baseland, and then we will finally hit autopilot. So that has activated the autopilot, and baseland is going to actually go ahead and conduct this burn once we get close enough. And so we just got a little bit of time here. We're going to be coasting forward. We're about 330 kilometers away from the landing site. I'm not 100% sure of everything I'm looking at here, but on baseland you'll see engine, and it has a percentage, and it's currently counting up, so it's at 7.94% and trending upwards. So I believe that that's telling us how much percentage of the engine power is going to be required if we were to conduct the burn at this point in time. So if we started our deorbit burn now, we'd only be using 8% of our engine power. I could be wrong, and most definitely probably am wrong, but that's what I believe we're looking at. And I recall something about one of the images that he had in the package showed you should hit the ignition button, I guess the IGN button on the right side, when engine gets to 50%. And I think that has something to do with G loading, so you don't want to, put too much G's on your crew members. Now, I tried pressing IGN, and again, I'm sure I'm doing something wrong here, but nothing happens. Whenever engine got to 50%, I hit IGN and nothing happened. So, in my testing, I said, all right, well, I'll just leave it alone. And I think it goes all the way up to almost 100%, and then it will finally activate the engines and go ahead and land. So that means that we get incredibly close to the landing site before the engines actually get ignited. But it worked, so that's the most important thing. So we've got some time here. We're just going to be coasting. Nothing's going to be happening. Let's go ahead and just cut forward in time, and we'll come back just before the engines ignite. Okay, we're getting pretty close to engine ignition here. We're at 87%, 89, 90, 91, 92, and there we go, engine ignition. Okay, so it went almost to 100%, like I said. You can see the engines are firing, and we are leaving Deep Star behind there. That looks really, really cool. So our crew members here on the lander are the lucky ones that get to go down and land on the surface of Rhea. And I have to say those micro textures really add so much to this, because looking further away, it just doesn't look that great. So big thanks to Jarmonic. I've probably said it before, and if I haven't, I apologize, but definitely a big thanks to him for that add-on. That has really added so much for landing on the surface of various bodies throughout the solar system. Alright, so I think one thing we're looking at on base land autopilot there is you'll see see sort of the cross, and then you'll see a line extending down to the surface. So I believe that where that line ends is the coordinates for our landing site, and you can see the cross, I believe, is indicating us. And as we slow down, I believe ideally that straight line should be extending directly below us, so that means that we're basically right above the landing site, and then base land is going to just bring us down, straight down, for a landing on the surface. And I guess you'll notice as the engines are burning, as we are scrubbing some of our orbital velocity here, that the engine percentage listed on baseland MFD there is coming down. So we've scrubbed quite a bit of velocity by this point. You can see our orbital speed on the HUD up there on the top, and it's getting pretty low. And we are within half a kilometer of the landing site, so we're essentially right over top of the landing site. And we're now just now about 200 meters from being directly over our landing site. So we'll pull up the surface MFD on the right side, and we're sort of because of the orientation of this lander with the with the engine down on the bottom, we're sort of just looking straight up into space, and you can see there is the lab, the UCGO cargo down there on the surface. So we are directly over our target. Fantastic. It looks like the main deorbit burn is just about complete. There we go. Alright, so base land is now going to orient us sort of level with the horizon. And I'm not sure why it gets so so wobbly here. It seemed like it had a little bit of trouble stopping this rolling here. I tried to use kill rotation and just try and settle it down, and eventually it settled down pretty much. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know how much testing was done with this lander or on other moons like Rhea that are much smaller than our own moon. All of these are probably factors that play into how this MFD actually works. But and again, I'm not 100% sure what I'm looking at. Like on base land there, you have the circle with the line going through the center of it. I'm not sure if that's like almost like targeting, and I guess when you're directly over your landing target, it sort of lines up with the fainter circle you can see below it. Anyways, just pulling up burn time here and putting in our delta V, estimating about 80 meters per second. Pretty much all of that just going straight down, and just looking at how much distance we would need to scrub that. So I'm not I think what I'm going to do is actually take over manual control here in just a bit, and that way I can manually set us down, just like they did in Apollo 11. They took over manual control and really do some hot shot landing here. No, I want to be able to set us down as smoothly as possible, and I think that Baseland does that great on the moon, but from my testing here on Rhea, it sort of causes a bouncing, and it's safe, you're not crashing, but we're going to try and do this a little bit more realistically, and quite frankly, it's fun landing manually. So I've disabled the autopilot on baseland. I've now hit the level horizon autopilot just to keep us nice and level with the horizon. And we are coming down pretty quickly, so I'm putting in more of our hover engine thrust here, slowing down our descent rate
1,000
to something a little bit more manageable. And we're under 1 kilometer. We are getting very close to the ground. Everything is looking great at this point. Just going to rotate over to the left and just get a nice view of Saturn there, because why not? That just looks fantastic. So we're about 600 meters, just over 600 meters above the ground, I guess. We can turn off the baseland MFD. We don't need that at this point. It has done a great job of ensuring that we hit our mark, because we do need to land pretty close to the cargo here that we have sitting on the surface. Otherwise, it would be quite a hike for our crew members to hop over there in their spacesuits. We do not have any rovers to drive around. You know, if UCGO worked, that could be fun actually. So hopefully Dan gets that working at some point in the future, because I definitely would like to do a series with UCGO. But as we come down here, you can see the micro textures by Jarmonic are really shining. That just looks so superbly great. Just using a little bit of linear RCS just to keep us from landing in one of those craters there. We have a nice manageable descent rate,
100.
Plenty of fuel, so I do not anticipate any problems with fuel. I guess it was quite a bit closer on fuel than probably I anticipated when we took off from Titan and rendezvoused with Deep Star, but it made for an exciting episode. So
40.
this one may not be quite as intense as that, but definitely it's always fun to land on a new world. So we're just about down on the ground here. And we've just hit the ground pretty softly there. So we'll go ahead and turn off the level autopilot. We're going to go to the scenario editor and just do what we did before. Go to location and hit apply. That just set us down with 0 ground speed, and that way we're not sliding on the surface. But we are safely on the ground, guys. We have made it here. And yeah, I mean, that's looks great. Okay, so as you can see, we have base camp here unpacked. Our crew is currently conducting science experiments. We have a fantastic view of Saturn in the background. And I'd say overall, this has been a pretty successful flight from Titan to Rhea. We're down here on the surface, and that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. So, as always, guys, really appreciate you watching. We are, 9 episodes in now, so I'm not sure how many other worlds we'll go to. We might check out Enceladus or something like that before we start planning our trip back home. So until the next episode, guys, listen, take care. Thanks as always for watching, and we will see you then.